à lunettes.
Oh, petite allumette, c'est dangereux d'être coquette, au point de n'en faire qu'à sa tête, quand ça peut vous coûter les yeux.
Je me fous d'y voir flou, je n'ai pas besoin de lunettes pour embrasser et chanter, je préfère garder les yeux fermés.
Oh, mon petit incendie, laissez-moi croquer vos habits, les déchiqueter à belles dents, les recracher en confetti, pour vous embrasser sous une pluie.
De confetti,
Oui, allons-y.
je n'y vois que du feu, en quelques pas seulement. Je peux me perdre loin, si loin dans ma rue, et même que je n'ose plus regarder le soleil, ni regarder le ciel droit dans les yeux. Je n'y vois que du feu.
Je vous guiderai à l'extérieur de votre tête, je serai votre paire de lunettes, vous seriez mon allumette.
Il me faut vous faire un aveu, je vous entends mais je ne pourrai jamais vous reconnaître, même assis entre deux petits vieux.
On se frottera l'un contre l'être à s'en faire cramer le squelette, et à l'horloge de mon cœur, à minuit pile on prendra feu. Pas même besoin d'ouvrir les yeux.
Je sais, je suis une flamme de tête, mais quand la musique s'arrête, j'ai du mal à ouvrir les yeux. Je m'enflamme allumette, mes paupières brûlent de mille feux, à en écraser mes lunettes, sans penser à rouvrir les yeux.
Elle danse comme un oiseau en équilibre sur ses petits talons aiguilles. Ses pieds commencent à s'en mêler, son joli nez vient de s'écraser.
Sur le pavé, je me fracasse la tête contre les arbres dont les feuilles bleues semblent plantées dans les cieux. Ils sont ce que l'on confond le mieux avec les cieux. C'est merveilleux, les arbres bleus.
Je n'y vois que du feu, en quelques pas seulement. Je peux me perdre loin, si loin dans ma rue, et même que je n'ose plus regarder le soleil, ni regarder le ciel droit dans les yeux. Je n'y vois que du feu, en quelques pas seulement. Je peux me perdre loin.
Good morning, everybody. Right. Pull up one more thing and then we will get started. I thought I already had it pulled up. I do not. Yeah, I mean, I look like this all the time though. I just happen to have dark eyeshadow on today. I don't know if you noticed, but I am very, very pale. And actually, it's funny because on this camera, I actually look a little less pale than I actually am very white. I matched very closely the color of my walls. Okay, so if I can get this to pull up, we'll get started. Well, smiling to me is terrifying. Yeah, that's kind of the point. It's so funny because even before that thing happened the other day in stream where someone's like, oh, you should smile more or whatever, I had drawn this specifically because it drives me nuts when people tell me to smile more. And I was like, fine, you want to smile? Here, I'm going to make it creepy as fuck. You're welcome. Okay. So... just getting my computer to do what I want it to do is a nightmare. Okay. Got it. Okay, so first things first is a review of what we went over last time. So for anyone that's in here that didn't go to that wasn't here last week for the stream, or anything like that, or is just coming in, whatever the case is, couple things. First off, if you want to watch the first stream to go through like everything that we went through here, what you see on screen now, you can go to my YouTube channel, which is Den of Spiders, and it'll be there. The easiest way to get to everything is to just go to Twitter, because Twitter has everything on it. It has all the links. It also has this template, so this template without the, like, just the heads. So if you want to practice, if you want to follow along, anything like that, you can download the PNG of this from my Twitter and use that. Twitter kind of compresses it a little bit, so not the best quality, but it is what it is. So if you want to do that, you can definitely do that. Otherwise, here is what we did last week. So what we talked about was different textures of hair, mostly, and just kind of getting a base movement down, how the hair will move based on texture. Because the primary in my opinion, one of the primary functions of hair, especially when it's down in a picture, is to help illustrate movement in the picture. If someone is just standing there static and their hair is, just straight down and nothing's really happening, then it illustrates that they're not moving at all. They are posed for that picture. Whereas with something like maybe, where the head is tilted, you'll see the hair move, or if the person is moving, or if it's a more dynamic pose, or the wind is blowing, or, whatever. It adds some dimension to the picture. It helps to give the illusion of movement when the picture itself doesn't move. So we talked about, kind of how hair falls and the natural order of that kind of thing. And like I said, you can go and watch that, because that was 3 hours, so you can, or 2.5. You can definitely go and watch that, and that I think will be really helpful to get the basics down. Today, the things that we plan on going over are going to be the different textures of hair on different lengths of hair, and how that can affect movement, how it can affect, everything. Depending on the length and the weight of the hair, and how the weight will change what the texture looks like, even if the texture isn't different, which we kind of touched on last week as well. And then we're going to go through, depending on time, we'll go through alternative hair. So, like, dreads, we'll say, because if you leave them down, they still move. They just move a whole lot differently, and the weight is a whole lot different than what you're going to see with, hair that is loose, we'll say. or things like that. And then we'll get into sectioning and lines, and then we'll likely not have enough time to get into color shading and finishing touches today. We'll probably have to do a third one. And then the plan is to do a whole separate video focusing on very textured hair. So like the third one that you see on here on the very right hand side, we're gonna kind of skip that because that is, I said this last time, I don't like the word advanced, but it's kind of true. It requires you to be a little bit more experienced in the techniques of how the hair moves or doesn't move and how to section and shade. It requires a little bit more proficiency in that, I think, because otherwise it's very daunting and it can be very overwhelming. It's possible, it's just it'll take you a little bit longer. So I think it's important to get the basics down first, and then you can go into something a little bit more like that. So okay, so what we're gonna do is skip this. We're just gonna take all this off and add another layer. So this is gonna be, we're gonna name this one session 1, and then session 1. I can spell. Look at me. Idiot. And this one will be session 2. Okay. Alright, so we're gonna start with short hair. And short hair, we're gonna do, so the idea is we're gonna do, write this on here so that way we have it. Okay. This is the idea. We're going to do straight, wavy, and then curly and textured hair. Because textured hair doesn't always mean curly. A lot of times it does, but sometimes it is as simple as something like my hair, where like there's parts of my hair that are very, very curly and then parts that are straight and then everything in between. And I would consider that more textured hair than curly. I also wouldn't necessarily consider it wavy because there are more curls and more texture in my hair than just wavy hair. So, alright. So we'll start with straight. Straight short hair is fairly straightforward. Pun totally intended there. And we're going to assume that they do not have hair like mine, which is intentionally styled in this way to a degree where, like, when I get out of the shower, I could allow it, like I could do something to it and it would dry like this. Like I don't need to actually style it a whole lot anymore because I've trained my hair to just sit there in this way, and it's short enough that it will. And that's something that's good to know about short hair, is that if you sleep on your head, right, in a weird way, and your hair gets all weird, like maybe you have a cowlick or something, if you have longer hair, it's a lot easier to rectify that situation in the morning with a brush, maybe spray a little bit of water on it, brush down, or, you know, the weight of the hair will hold it down. If you have short hair, it doesn't really do that. It's a lot harder to fix those kinds of things. So keep that in mind when you are drawing, depending on what you're doing and the emotion that you're trying to evoke in the illustration. You may want to keep it that way. You may want to have pieces of hair sticking out, and they will, because the hair is not as heavy because there's not as much of it. But we're going to focus on just a basic, we'll say mid-length pixie cut, where there's not anything coming out along the sides here. It's really just focused on the top of the head. So for straight hair, it's fairly straightforward, like I said. It just sits on the head, and you can decide where you want the part to be. And this is really, when it comes to short hair, this is probably the most helpful thing to know, is depending on where your part is going to go is really going to help to illustrate some of that, quote, personality. This is where you kind of get to have a little bit of fun with short hair, because a lot of people don't like putting short hair on people because they're like, either one, they feel like it's a cop-out because there's not a lot to work with, or two, they feel like it's not fun because they don't get to play with it as much. The part is where you get to play with short hair and putting layers in where that part is and things like that. So keep that in mind. If you are shying away from short hair for those reasons, don't. Really, like, play around with it. There are ways to make short hair extremely interesting. And a very good example of that is a picture that I was doing yesterday. So this hair is, I went full ham on this hair, so we're not here yet. But like, this character has short hair, but it's exciting. Like, there are ways to part the hair, there are ways to give it a haircut that will make it more interesting and more dynamic. So just keep that in mind. Don't shy away from it. Try new things. Play around with it. But in this case, we're just going to do a fairly simple, I call it the, like, Jennifer Goodwin bob or pixie, because her hair is just so cute, and it's just in this cute little short, very cropped to her head pixie. Now you notice I'm still putting in small little areas where the hair might flip out or move in a specific way, or whatever the case is. Keep in mind too that for the most part there's always going to be hair here that kind of sits, and you can see here where I'm, my hair does that too. It's not, necessarily cropped all the way up and shaved all the way up. Obviously, if you're doing a more masculine figure, you can take sideburns into account as well, and things like that. But you can really do a lot with short hair. So it's not just boring and static and whatever. Now, is it the most dynamic? No, but it's going to be nice. It's going to be clean. And again, this isn't static. It's not, it's not a helmet of hair. It doesn't look like that. There's more to it than just this. Even though primarily these are the sections we're using. We're using one to the side, and then one in the front for the bang. So again, just keep that in the back of your head when you're dealing with short hair. There are small little things that you can do with the movement that will make it a little bit more exciting. Takeshi Obata, let me look that up because I feel like that name is very, very familiar to me, but for some reason I am not... He's a manga artist, I know, but I'm trying to think of what he does. Oh, he did Death Note, right. Yes. Oh, you said it. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of my short hair, or, short to mid-length pixie cuts and stuff, a lot of them come from manga and anime, because I feel like that art style really, really allows for a little bit more interesting things. Another really good thing to look at, which is, I think, is weird to some people, is looking at Korean models if you're looking for dynamic short hair, because Korean male models have some of the nicest haircuts. It's crazy to me, but it's really good to look at because there's no gender to anything, so put them on whatever you want, but it's a really good hair study. They have some of the most interesting haircuts, and they are nice. Really nice. The way they're styled, the way they're cut, the way they fall on the head, like it's a really good way to get something that isn't so cropped to the head like this, and we'll go through that too when we get to like the wavy, of how it can be, still have a little bit of volume and, not have to be styled like this. Again, we'll probably go into styled hair in a different thing, probably, after we finish kind of the basics. Okay. It's a good Google search. Not gonna lie to you. Korean models in general, like, it's ridiculous. They're just so pretty. Dumb. Quarantine stream, guys. I have a runny nose. I just have really bad allergies. And it's nice here today in Arizona. Like, it was like 62 when I went to get coffee this morning, so I drove with my windows down like an idiot, so my allergies are killing me. Okay. So, now we go to the side view. Now, because we're dealing with short hair, And as I said before, regardless of gender or anything like that, short haircuts are often what people like to put on a more masculine figure because they feel like that helps to accentuate, you know, angular bone structures and things like that. I'm actually a very good example of that because I have a very angular face and short hair looks very good on me. And since a lot of men have very, very angular faces, it's a really good way to accentuate the masculinity in a picture without having to like put those hard angles in. It just helps to accentuate the angles that are there. So you'll see it more on masculine figures for sure. But that being said, we're going to talk about like sideburns, we'll say. We're going to use the same haircut, but because we are doing it from the side, we're going to put the part in the same place, which is right here. And again, remember how I said that there are sections. So we're working in this section, in this section. So we've got, you know, one side of the part, the other side of the part, and then the bangs. So if we're doing that, we're going to give this character sideburns. And we're going to taper it in the back a little bit differently than we might do for a more feminine haircut. It's going to be just a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Structured, I guess, in the back. Would the back be a part of the side section from a more rear focus angle? That is really going to depend. So most of the time on the crown of the head, so towards the back here, on either side or in the center, most people will have either some sort of cowlick or convergence, if you will, of where the hair sits, because it goes, you know, in radial, for the most part, grow patterns go like this around the head, right? So there's an origin point, which would be, you know, the back of the head. So, a swirly, right. So essentially what you would do, and that's something we can talk about too, and I may just pull up another picture just to kind of give you an idea. Most of the time, so the part on the back of the head, so say the part is, if we're looking at the back of this head, the side part is here, and this is the crown of the head here. It's gonna come here, and the hair is gonna like almost create, just looks like a butt. You're welcome. So it's almost going to get, it's like the hair is going to overlap each other, essentially, is what's going to happen. So the hair is going to overlap each other back here, and it's going to kind of be its own section. And if it helps, what you can do if you're doing the back is you can do, okay, a section here, and then a section here. But what you don't want to do is move all of this hair this way, all of this hair this way, and then all of this hair this way. Then it's going to look like a bad bowl cut. It needs to, so starting from about right here, it's going to need to start, you know, tapering into the back. And again, I think that this might just be easier to illustrate after we kind of get through this. And I can kind of show you what I mean. But yes and no. It is its own section, but not really its own section. Okay, so back to this. You want to keep in mind, again, like we said before last time, you are going to see an amount of hair on the other side. Because the hair is short and straight, you're not going to see as much. It's going to be easier to tame the hair into sitting flat against the forehead. Like here, it's not going to move a whole lot from that space because it is straight and it will just sit there. Gravity will do its job and it'll just kind of let it lay how it's going to lay. So that's pretty basic. Next is going to be wavy. So wavy short hair is probably my favorite, and the reason that I say that is because wavy short hair allows you to give the illusion of volume with the hair because of just by adding a couple little extra curves in the hair. If we take the same haircut but make it wavy, this is all going to be shorter than what it looks like. So keep that in mind too. Like, say the hair is all cut to this length that you see in the straight photo, and you go to the wavy one. The hair is going to appear shorter even though the hair lengths themselves are longer. So if we keep this haircut, you'll also notice it's going to be a little bit more, we'll use the word unruly just for the sake of brevity here. It's going to look a little bit more unruly. There's going to be a little bit more randomness to how the hair lays because there's texture in it. So the texture is going to determine how the hair falls at the end of the day. I think this is the cutest haircut. So you'll see it's not a huge difference, but there is a difference here. So the hair stops right here, whereas the hair stops right here. So there's just a little bit of a difference there because the hair is wavy, so it's being kind of pulled up. The other thing that you can do with a little bit of wavy hair is you can just add a little bit more dimension to the sides of the head by making those little pieces a little bit smaller, like baby hairs. You can also play around with little curly baby hairs on the back of the neck, things like that. But this is the biggest thing to remember when you're doing wavy hair on a short kind of pixie cut, is that it is going to appear shorter unless you make the haircut itself longer. Now, when you're doing it from a side view, the side view you get a little bit more, in my opinion, for anything textured, you get a little bit more, you get a better vantage point on what the hair actually looks like. And that's because you are able to see how it hits the nape of the neck. You're able to see how it actually sits on the side of the face a little bit better. Again, this is easier to see from a front view when the hair is longer. When it's shorter, though, most of the hair is on the head. So the more of the actual head that you see, the more you actually get to experience of what this haircut would actually look like on someone when it's drawn. Alright. So this thing you want to remember when you're dealing with any kind of textured hair, and this is something, again, we touched on last time, is the shorter the hair is, the tighter that quote, curl pattern or the more emphasized that texture is likely to be. Not always, but most of the time. So this hair, if this person were to grow out their hair, likely with the way that the texture sits with it being this short, it would actually look a lot less wavy as it gets longer because the weight of the hair would pull the texture out of the hair to an extent, and it would look a lot less textured than it does here. But that being said, the shorter the hair gets, the more you want the curls to be a little bit emphasized. So as you can see, the curls are more emphasized towards the nape of the neck because that's where the hair is the shortest, because it blends into, you know, the nape of the neck. What happened to the rest of my word over here? What's going on? Okay. So the next one is curly. Curly is pretty self-explanatory, in my opinion, when it comes to this, based on what we've talked about with straight wavy. It is going to be right up against the head with a haircut this short. If the hair is very curly or very textured, chances are it is going to look the most, you're going to see the most out of that curl pattern or out of that texture, the closer it is to the head. So, with this, I would probably draw myself just a guideline of where I want the hair to sit, which again will be just slightly shorter than the wavy. And I would just follow that line. And it would be, again, very, very close to the head, very tightly packed, if you will. But here's the thing that you want to remember, and this is something we talked about last time too. When you're dealing with curl patterns and texture, it's going to create almost like a nest on the inside. It's going to create this structure on the inside that's going to give it a lot of volume. It's not necessarily going to move a whole lot. So you could give this hair the illusion of just a little bit more volume because the hair is curly and it's got a structure underneath it to sit on, if you will. Now, personally, I have a hard time when I'm doing really curly short hair. It is a lot harder for me because I am so used to having the movement in the hair. So the shorter the hair is and the more attached to the head it is, I have a hard time visually feeling like what I'm creating looks correct, because in my brain I think, well, the hair's not moving, and that's how that's how my art conveys movement, is with the hair. I use a lot of it. A lot of the movement is conveyed with where the hair sits. So when we get to something like this, where the hair is very close to the head, doesn't have a lot of movement, because again, there's just so much structure there, then I start to kind of get in my head about it. So keep that in mind when you are doing something like this, that depending on what's happening in the picture, it might not always look exactly how you want it to look. It might not look right at first, but I promise you once it's done, it does look good. It's just kind of getting yourself out of that and remembering that this is actually how hair would look on a person. And again, I'm not the expert here. This is just something I've done for a very long time and things that I've learned in doing it for a very long time. I'm sure there are other people out there who are better at this than me. But here we are. Thanks for being here. Now again, with the side, it's gonna look awkward, and this is kind of where I start to have a couple of little issues. You're not gonna see as much of that taper on the back of the head as you would see with the wavy, or you would see with the straight hair. And the reason for that is because, again, the shorter the hair gets, the closer it is to the head. So just reminds me of like old Grecian painting, like with boys with just really curly hair right up against their head. So again, you're going to see a harder line here, and like I said, that has to do with the fact that the shorter the hair is, the more you're going to see that curl pattern. So chances are you're not going to see a whole lot of difference there. So here is an example of the different textures in short hair. I don't have a ton of people in here right now, but does anybody have questions before I move on to medium length hair? And while I'm waiting, I will actually pull up an example of kind of the wavy hair and what weight will do to it, like length and weight will do to it. You guys would be proud of me. I actually organized my pictures. So what do you mean by struggling with consistency? Is it something that you can explain and maybe I can help? It's kind of hard, I know, when you're dealing with something visual and I can't see what you mean, but if you can help, if you can explain it a little bit, I might be able to give you some insight. Yeah, no, that does. That absolutely makes sense. Um, so what I would suggest doing in that case is if you are looking to do curly hair and it's coming out as wavy, or you're looking to do wavy hair and it turns out as curly, you have a couple of options. Um, you can kind of go maybe a little bit harder towards making the hair straight and putting movement in it, which could lead you to more of a wavy hairstyle, or you can step back from the picture before you start to put down the hard lines and kind of choose which lines you want to use. You could go in and actually um, kind of ignore some of the lines that you put in. And so, for instance, with something like this, if I wanted to make the front of her hair look more wavy than curly in this last picture, I could do, instead of following the lines like this, what I could do is, oops, kind of bypass this whole section here. I want it on the right layer. There we go. I could bypass that whole section there and do this, and then this, and then this. Like, you can basically choose which lines you use, which can help to give you a little bit more control over how tight that curl pattern or that texture looks on the figure. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful. Again, maybe one of these days you and I can get on like a either like get on your stream or whatever, and you can show me and I can help. But yeah, that's a way to handle that without seeing exactly how you're drawing it. It's hard for me to give you exact advice, but this is just how I would handle it based on the way that based on the steps I take to do this work. Okay. So what I pulled up is I pulled up a picture of Elkin. And he has long and short hair. So the hair down here is the curls are a little bit less defined. There's a couple little defined curls in here that are maybe layers, but for the most part it kind of is pretty simple. Whereas at the top of his head, the curls stick up more. There's a lot more structure to that part of his head because there's more texture in that area of the hair because he has a mullet, so it's shorter on the top and longer on the bottom. There's more texture there to give it that volume because the curls are not being weighed down by the weight of the hair. Just the bottom part is. So kind of to give you a little bit of an illustration, this is not as extreme as you would see like maybe with curlier hair, but it's an example. Okay. So next we will move on to, oops, that's not what I wanted at all. Alright, so now we're gonna do medium. So medium length hair is what I think most people gravitate towards. Medium length hair in my head, medium length hair is anything from just at or below the jaw and to about maybe maybe just below shoulder length is what I would consider medium hair. So this section right in here is what I would consider medium, and then anything past this I would consider long, and then you get into like extra long and stuff like that, but that's a whole other beast, and that's usually not something that you do if you're doing something more realistic. You are probably doing, you know, medium length hair is the most common. But we'll start with the we'll start with hair that maybe stops here, so you can kind of get an idea of what the hair might do when it's not actually hitting the shoulders, and then we can talk about that with the long hair. So we'll do kind of like a longer bob. How about we do an asymmetrical angled, long angled bob? We'll do a long angled bob. Okay. Alright, so when we're doing the straight version of this, it's going to be pretty self-explanatory. We're going to do a center part for this, just to kind of illustrate how the hair might fall. So if we're doing a long bob, long bobs will end here and get shorter in the back. Actually, you know what? Let's not do that. Let's just do a straight cut. So, alright. So these are the sections you're going to be using, right? Like a little tent on the top of their head. So for straight hair, as stated before, until we start getting into like heavy movement, straight got really confused. Yeah, you're good. So for the most part, until you start getting into a lot of heavy movement, straight hair is pretty straightforward. It falls in a pretty predictable way. It doesn't really do a whole lot. There's not a lot of dynamic things happening when you're dealing with short or medium length or even long straight hair, because it just lays. That's why a lot of people with straight hair wish they had curly hair. I mean, obviously you can add volume into it, but that kind of gets into styling, and we're not really quite there yet. We're just talking about what the hair would look like if it's straight. Now keep in mind with straight hair too, it is more likely to fall. So if you turn your head, the hair is more likely to fall, because like I said, it's just going to kind of follow the way gravity wants it to go, rather than having any kind of structure to keep it in place, whether that be styling or whatever the case is there. Now, this is kind of one of the things that you're going to start to run into, and is most prevalent when you're dealing with bobs or medium length hair. Long hair, it is less noticeable, just because of, you know, the length of the hair and where it sits on the body. It's easier to disguise this. But when you're working on something that maybe ends in the middle of the neck or just at the shoulders, you have to pay attention to the length on both sides. So it can be really easy to want to make the length the same on both sides, but then if you think about it, if they turn their head back this way, the hair on this side is now going to be longer, because when they move their head, the hair is obviously going to, one, move up in this space, but it's also going to fall in such a way where you're not going to see some of the hair. It's going to fall either back behind the head or maybe fall across the face like it is here, that kind of thing. And actually this angle of hair is really not how this will fall. Let me do that again. It would probably fall more like this and there. So you're going to make this longer. Not a lot, just slightly longer on the side, because that's how the hair is moving, because their head is tilted. Now again, this is not an extreme tilt, there's not a lot of movement here, but there's enough movement to be able to see pieces of hair that are falling around from the back that are going to look shorter, that are going to kind of peek out from the back and that kind of thing. And again, when it doesn't do that, it starts to kind of look a little bit like a helmet. And these little things might seem like it's not clean, But at the end of the day, if you do it right and you practice it and you really learn how the hair moves naturally, it looks natural. It doesn't look messy. It doesn't look like you're forcing the movement onto the hair. It looks natural. That will come with practice, and I know that I said that a lot in the last stream. You're going to hear that a lot in every one of these streams that I do. This will 100% all come down to practice. Art is a process of failure. Like, truly, it's a series of failures, and what you have to do is understand that that's what this is, and continue forward and continue fixing and continue working at it and continue practicing at it, because that's how we learn as a species. That's how we learn how to do things correctly, is either we watch somebody else do it wrong and we learn from their mistakes, which is not common, and especially in art it's very difficult to use that methodology because nobody's art is the same. So learning from someone else's mistakes is really not helpful. But we learn from our own mistakes, and then we move forward and we learn how to do it better. Now, we may be able to pick up techniques from other people that we can then morph and transition into our own thing, but for the most part, it really is just a personal drive to continue to practice all the time. So don't be afraid to do that. It definitely can be very daunting, and I get that, but if you ever get stuck, feel free to message me, and I'm happy to help. Like, I always want to, especially because I know what it's like to have an artist block or to feel like you can't do something, and it's devastating. So if you ever just need to vent, please tell me. Okay, back to the lesson. Sorry. Tangent over. Okay. So here's a good example of kind of just a straight, blunt cut bob, tilted to the side. And again, I say blunt cut because these pieces of hair, as I stated before, these are coming from a different part of the head. So when they come from like back here, technically that length is still the same, but it's going to look shorter because it's peeking out from the back because it's moving from a different spot in the head. So just, again, little things to keep in mind. Then we go to straight, just kind of straight on. I guess we could still kind of make this angled. Well, all right. And I'll preach it until I'm blue in the face. Hair comes off the head, so do not use the headline if you can help it. Yes, DM with more foot questions, Blake. Yeah, perfect. Absolutely. 100%, you got it. Hair does not grow directly off the scalp and then fall. There's a space in between the scalp and where the hair sits, especially. I mean, let's just set aside the fact that the hair grows off the scalp. It also, there's more hair for the top part, what you're seeing, to sit on, so there's space there. That will, honestly, that will make an enormous difference in how natural your hair looks on your subjects. Okay. Now, again, because we're dealing with straight hair, you're probably not going to see a whole lot from the other side. You will see some, but you're not going to see a ton. And a lot of that is because unless it is styled to do so, or you intentionally move the hair out this way as if the person is kind of leaning forward and their head is tilted in that direction, you're likely not going to see a whole lot of hair on the other side. Now, when we get to the wavy and the curly, you're going to see a little bit more of that, and that's because, again, there's more structure underneath the hair to kind of hold it in place, so the movement isn't going to be as straightforward. Okay, so on to wavy. I know I keep turning my page, but it's because I am left-handed, and up until March, I was a strictly traditional artist, and when I was learning how to write in school, I would drag my hand across my paper because I'm left-handed, and like I can't, doing it like this was weird. And I remember nothing was working in trying to teach me how to write more legibly, and so my mom put me in a calligraphy class. And and they taught me how to turn my paper to the side, and that changed my life. So I turn my paper to the side all the time. It's almost like straight hair falls with more weight. That's actually true. You're not wrong. So basically what it is when there's a curl pattern, gravity affects the curls differently, or when there's texture, it affects the hair differently because there are pieces of the hair that no matter how gravity pulls on it, it's going to stay in that shape, right? With straight hair, there's nothing to keep gravity from pulling it in whatever direction it wants because there's no texture to the hair. There's nothing there that's keeping gravity from pulling it in a direction. So to an extent, you are correct. Because it doesn't have anything to stop gravity from pulling it wherever it wants to go. So yeah, I would agree with that explanation. Okay, so now we're gonna do wavy hair. Now we kind of touched on this a little bit when we did when I gave you the example of Krebig, one of the characters I draw a lot. He has wavy hair that's around a medium length. And his hair, so it's very hard for me to draw this shorter because whenever I draw this texture, I'm always drawing it on him, and his hair goes to about here, maybe a little, like right below the shoulders, or right below, depends. See, even I have inconsistency. But I am attempting here. All right. So the hair here may not move across the face as readily as straight hair would. And the reason for that is because, again, there's texture in the hair that is telling gravity, no, we don't move that way. However, to illustrate the difference between wavy short and wavy medium length, I'm going to use... Hang on. I don't like the... Give me just a second, I gotta fix it. My hair, my head got stuck in curly there for a second. Wavy hair would actually move in a fairly similar fashion to straight, just there'd be a little bit less random movement. Okay, so if we pull up the short hair, hang on a sec. If we pull up the short hair, you can see here that the waves are pronounced all over the structure of the hair. And that's because it is shorter, and the hair is less affected by the weight of itself, and therefore the curls are able to be more defined. Now when you go to the medium length hair, it is slightly straight on the top. And that is because there is more weight now on the hair that is pulling some of that texture out of the top. So the longer this hair gets, the longer it's going to stay or appear straight before it starts to kind of get that wave pattern on it towards the ends of the hair. So that is another little tiny thing that you can put in when you're dealing with hair and when you're illustrating hair that will help to create a little bit more natural feel to the way the hair is sitting. Now, with wavy on the side, this is where you're going to start to see just a little bit more from the side on the other side of the hair, or on the other side of the head, because I made that just a little long. That's okay. In this case, it'll help to illustrate my point. Because there's more structure there, so the hair is going, instead of the hair only one or two pieces moving or whatever, or the hair kind of, you know, I don't know how to explain it. the hair being a little bit more independent of each other, like each individual hair, the texture is keeping these clumps of hair together, these sections of hair together, so that when you move, more of the hair is actually going to move forward because it's going to move in sections. So if one section moves, everything that's kind of in that section or in that curl is going to move with it. So you're more likely to see just a little bit more on the other side of the face when you're looking from a profile view than you would with straight hair, or honestly with curly hair, depending on how short it is. Because it's moving a little bit more as a unit rather than as individual hairs, or not moving at all, like what textured hair might do. Or more textured hair, I should say. To give you kind of an idea. The back of the head, too, you're going to see a little bit more definition of, I don't want to say definition of curls, but you're going to see a little bit more volume on the back of the head with this because, again, it's a 3D object, right? So this is a convex surface. So it is you're going to see more because there's going to be an area where the head is physically pushing the hair farther out than what's up here or what's down here because it's a convex surface. So keep that in mind as well. Those little tiny adjustments can make it look a little bit more natural as you're going through and drawing these. Alright, so I almost don't want to continue to do curly and textured hair because it's kind of the same for every single one. But we'll do it for this. So for a curly texture hair in a bob, again, with curly hair, I tend to do a kind of a base idea of where I want the hair to sit. We're gonna redo this. Sorry, guys. Now, this is kind of where we get into talking about how curly hair moves as opposed to how like really heavily textured hair or very tight curl patterns move in comparison to everything else. There is going to be a lot more evenness on both sides of the head because, again, there's more structure underneath. It's like taking a bubble wrap and wrapping it around an object and then wrapping the bubble wrap like you would for a Christmas gift or something like that. Even if the structure itself underneath is a certain shape, when you start to wrap it in bubble wrap, you create an infrastructure that the paper then sits on top of. So you're not seeing the shape of the object in the middle, you're seeing the shape of the structure. You're seeing a shape of whatever you put the shape of the bubble wrap in is what you're going to see on the wrapping paper because of the structure that is underneath it. It's kind of the same thing with curly hair. So if you cut the curly hair in a specific way, if you cut it to be this little cute little bob, it's going to look a lot more structured and you're not going to see as much of that movement. It's going to seem a little bit more even on both sides regardless of where the hair is going because it's hitting up against that structure on the inside that's created by the curl pattern. So I love medium length curly hair. I think it is just the absolute cutest thing in the entire universe. I think it is oh cute. Like in illustrations and in real life, I just think it's adorable. And in this case, you might get a couple little curls on the face, but most of the time it's going to stay pretty structured. But yeah, I think that is so cute. It's driving me crazy. So adorable. I love it so much. I don't have a straw in this. Did you see me searching for my straw just now? Goodness. There are only 2 people in here. That's probably good. Okay. So now we get to the side, and I think I've said this every single time I've done this. This is where you see a lot of this. So if you have textured hair, haircuts are very different because of, again, the way that structure works on the inside. The hair is going to sit differently on top of that, which means if the hair is shorter, if it's all one length, it's going to be shorter in the back because of that concave surface that it's sitting on, also known as your skull. It's going to look different, and it's actually going to give the illusion of there being less hair up here, that the hair up here is shorter, when in reality it was maybe cut at the same length, but once it dries and that curl happens, it sits on top of that structure, which then sits on top, or it sits on top of the skull, which then sits on top of that structure, and it's just like, it makes it look a lot more layered than it may have been cut to be. So keep that in mind, that it's going to look shorter in the back. And again, you're probably not going to see a ton in the front. You might see one or two little curls, but because this is such a structured look, you're likely not going to see a lot of that. But the curls here are going to protrude a lot more, and then you're going to end up with something similar in the back. And depending on how the hair is cut and how short it actually gets in the back, once it starts to kind of move up when the head turns to the side, you may or may not see a couple of those little baby hairs. Okay, so there is mid-length, medium length, straight wavy and curly hair or textured hair. Any questions on that before I move on to long hair? Long hair. While I'm waiting for that, I'm actually going to look to see if I have any examples of short hair. Finished short hair, I should say. When I say examples, what I'm looking at is I'm looking for pictures that I have drawn of short hair on a character that might help to illustrate the idea of what it might look like once it's finished. Anime is not a good reference because anime hair defies laws of physics and the universe in general, so we're not going to use that. I think the closest thing I have is Helnir, which is a character, a drow character, of course. Well, I guess I have Tilsis also. Really? Okay, we'll use Helnir. So this is a good example of kind of mid-length to short hair. The front of her hair is obviously a blunt bang, and then she's got some longer pieces on the side that fall just a little, so maybe a little bit more angled, and then the rest of the hair is pulled back into a little bob. So this is kind of a good example. There's an amount of movement here, not a lot though, because her hair is straight. Again, gravity affects it a little bit differently. If she's not actively moving, her hair's just going to sit where it is. You know, it's not really going to move a whole lot unless it's longer and getting caught on other things or falling over a surface or things like that. And that's something that we'll get into with long hair, which is really where straight hair gets its opportunity to shine, whereas textured hair, I feel like mid-length and short are the two that really, really illustrate how beautiful textured hair is. Straight hair, though, gets its moment when it's long, in my opinion. Not that this is bad, but you don't see a lot of movement here because there's just not a lot of movement that can happen when your hair's, you know, this length straight. But this is a good example of what it might look like when it's finished. Nope. Going through every example I have. Okay. Alright, so no questions, so we're going to move on to the next one. which is going to be long hair. Okay. So long hair. We're actually going to start on the other end because I will probably spend most of my time on straight hair. Because that, again, like I said, this is kind of where it really shines. This is where you get the opportunity to really, really make the hair look dynamic with straight hair. So I feel like it's important to look at it a little bit more closely. So to start with curly hair. So again, we actually talked about this in the last one. I don't know that we will do long curly hair in this because I feel like, again, we touched on this in the first session. I will go through a couple of things just to kind of reiterate, and then we'll move on to wavy. So with curly or textured hair when it's long, it is 100% up to you how tight you want the curl pattern to be and the length that you want it to be at, because the hair is it's up to you. Most people will avoid curly hair like the plague when it comes to long hair. If they're going to do curly hair, it's going to be on a shorter hair model, not on long hair most of the time, because it's daunting. It's a lot of work. So I'm going to kind of just leave this at this. It doesn't necessarily move a ton. Again, that structure on the inside keeps it from being able to do that. You can definitely add little bits here and there. You can take pieces of hair in the front, like maybe you don't want it to be, as curly, and so you want the weight of the hair to kind of, straighten it out a little bit at the top. You can definitely do that and not have the layers in like I have in this initial picture, to help create a little bit more dimension with the curly hair. But again, I think that needs a dedicated session. So we're going to leave that one as is and move on to wavy. So wavy hair, when you're dealing with long hair, and now is the time where we are going to add some shoulders here. Alright. So wavy hair, when it's long, is going to have a little bit more movement than curly hair, but it's going to have less movement than straight hair. It is not going to catch as easily on like a section of clothing or something like that as straight hair might. Because the curls are dictating what the hair does, or the texture is dictating what the hair does, sometimes more than gravity would, or, that's a poor way to word that. As I stated before, where the sections of hair are moving as sections because there might be a curl pattern and more there, depending on how much hair has that same curl pattern and is in that one section, the hair isn't necessarily going to catch as easily on something and stay in a spot, more so that it's going to move because that section of hair is heavier. So gravity is going to affect it differently because it's going to move the whole section of hair and it's less likely to get caught. It does still have that movement and that tendency to stay in a spot. If the head moves this way, it might stay here. Just less so than straight hair. So, if we keep that in mind, And again, for brevity's sake, I'm just going to put this piece of the hair behind the ear just because I don't want to focus too much on the face and what falls in front of the face. This is more about how the hair moves as a unit. So you'll see that the hair can sit and kind of move and kind of, like I said, get stuck on like a piece of clothing or sit a little bit differently. And hey, Prism, and it will just move a little bit differently and it'll get stuck a little bit differently. Where you're going to see a lot of that dynamic kind of movement and change is on the other side. So where the hair is kind of being compressed, not necessarily where the hair is pulling from, whereas with straight hair, you're going to see more of that movement and more of that that kind of dynamic hair catching and whatever. You're going to see that more on the side that's being pulled, more so than you're going to see it over here. Wavy hair is going to bunch up because, again, those pieces are either going to move as a unit or not move as a unit because there's more texture, so there's more structure there. So if they are doing this, the hair might bunch up right here. And do something like this, where it falls over the shoulder. And it's going to create an amount of volume on that side, but it's going to create the heaviness right here next to the neck, where the hair is going to kind of bunch up right here. Again, that is not always going to be the case depending on how the hair is styled and things like that, but that is what you want to remember the most when it comes to movement, is depending on how the head is moving, depending on where maybe the wind is blowing, or wherever the tension versus the relaxed area is, because whenever you're creating tension, there's going to be an area somewhere else that is being relaxed or being pushed against or whatever. So as you see here, this part is tension, and this part is creating that kind of that bulk, or that bulk, depending on how you have the hair styled. We already went over wavy long hair in the first session on the side. Nothing's really changed here. There's not a lot of movement happening in this particular picture because of how static it is. So this is, you just want to remember where you're putting the patterns. You want to remember that, once you hit the crown of the head, there's going to be more volume back there because there's more texture, those kinds of things. You just want to remember that those things exist and practice that and make sure that you're paying attention to those little things, because those little details will definitely communicate. So here's where we spend all of our time. And that is straight, long hair. So I am going to create a very basic shape for how I want the hair to sit. Okay. So remember, as I said before, with straight hair, there's no real structure to keep gravity from pulling each hair individually, and gravity dictates where the hair moves. What allows straight hair to stop are obstacles in its environment, such as a hand or a shoulder, a piece of clothing, in this case, a shoulder, or a neck, or, maybe pulling the hair back, or another piece of clothing, or something like that. Those are the things that are going to basically stop gravity from pulling those hairs in whatever direction the head is moving, or, whatever the case is. Because again, we're not dealing with elements, we're not dealing with wind or anything like that. We're just talking about static poses, moving from side to side, that kind of thing. Eventually we'll get into all of that, but probably not today. So if I draw a basic, very long hair, no layers, so to speak, just long hair. Again, you're going to have a couple pieces that probably move like this along the face. You're going to have these pieces that might be over the shoulder, or basically things that are getting, I keep saying it, but things that are getting stuck on your clothes, things that are getting stuck on your shoulder, or being stopped by something. There's an obstacle in the way, gravity can't pull it that direction. Um, Now, when you get to the other side, you will have the same kind of idea as the wavy hair, where you tilt the head and, you know, those sections of hair kind of bunch up. You're probably going to have things like that. It's going to be a lot less extreme, though, because again, each individual hair is moving on its own, and gravity is dictating where it goes. So, it's not going to be an entire section of hair necessarily. It's going to be these pieces behind are moving in a specific way. The pieces in front maybe are getting caught a little bit here, but for the most part, they're going to slide off eventually, you know, just because, again, they're not moving as a section, they're moving as individual hairs in this case. For the But this is a really good way to create a little bit of dimension in the hair. Let me show you what I mean. So, if that's what we do in a dynamic pose, here's the alternative. The alternative is and to an extent this is hyperbole, but you know, to an extent it's not. The alternative is something like this, where it's just very straight against the head and it just kind of moves as one unit. There's less dimension, there's less movement that's being created because of the fact that you're not taking into account those pieces that are stuck on the shoulder, or the pieces that are kind of bunched up right here right before they fall off. Or one of my absolute favorite things to do when working on straight hair, like long straight hair, is the shoulder and having hair that is stuck on the shoulder, like this, on the outside of the shoulder, where the head has moved and maybe the hair was kind of draped, like right here. The hair moves and some of the hair kind of falls to the front, and then eventually it's going to fall forward in front of her neck and maybe give her one of those bits here that's now fallen in front of her collarbone, and that kind of thing. Again, straight hair, movement in straight hair is one of my absolute favorite things to do because it's the way that you make straight hair not boring. Like it's or you put it into a style, but then I don't consider it straight. I just consider it styled. So, but this is a really great way to convey movement with straight hair when it can sometimes be kind of hard to do because of the nature of straight hair in general. So if we go to long hair in a straight format, you will actually see a good amount of hair on the opposite side, depending on how the hair is falling and things like that. But you are more likely to see hair along the other side, strictly based on the fact that, like, we'll say that the hair is tucked back away for the most part, but there are pieces that are moving forward, dipping below the shoulder, or something like that. So you are more likely to see some hair on the other side as well. And this is what I was kind of touching on earlier with the mid-length hair, is it's a lot easier to disguise the lengths of the hair, so you're not having to worry so much about making one side shorter when it's moving, or like this side, this back piece here, you don't need to necessarily worry so much about that looking shorter because it's farther back in space. You don't necessarily have to worry about that as much because it's easier to disguise when you're working with long hair. And again, I consider long hair anything below, like, we'll say the collarbone, like anything below the collarbone I would consider long. Okay, so we have a couple of options here. We can continue on with the next thing, which is we're actually going to skip the alternative hairstyles, and the reason for that is because I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to put alternative hair, textured hair, and styled hair in its own stream, because I think that each one of those things kind of needs its own moment, and I don't think that it's a good segue here when we're just dealing with basics. So the next thing that we could get into is sectioning. And then we have color, shading, and finishing touches. I honestly can't tell you how long sectioning is going to take. So if we want to, we can move into that, or we can stop it here, have a little bit shorter of a stream this week, and then next week we can focus on those 4 things, which are the sectioning, the lines that go into that, color, shading, and then finishing touches, and have that all be one group together as kind of the finishing, and kind of leave this as it is and let you do with this information for the week and then come back. So are there any preferences while I find an example of long straight hair, which is going to be easy because Kiri has long straight hair. Okay. So I'm going to, since we don't have any opinions, I'm going to make the executive decision because we don't have a lot of people in here today anyway. And I really think that the next section of this is really what I think people are excited for, which is like the sectioning, the lines, like putting the finishing touches on the hair, the sketching, the movement. That's all just kind of basic stuff. So we'll leave that for the next one. But before we go, though, I can at least show you some examples of long straight hair, and kind of how the movement is created depending on the style of the hair, or how she happens to have it done that day, or whatever the case is. So this is Kiri. Most of you are familiar with Kiri, I think, if you follow me anywhere other than here. Or even if you follow me here, you've seen her a bunch. I draw her all the time. That is why this channel is Den of Spiders, is because I draw mostly drow. As you can see, so when she's got her hair pulled back, right? So it's pretty, it's pretty nondescript at the top, just pulled back into, slicked back or whatever. But you'll notice that here along the side, there are, the way that the hair kind of bunches here by the ear, and then, kind of bunches up back behind the ear and goes back around, and you see the movement of where it's kind of hitting her neck and then going behind her shirt. And then here, where it's actually going and sitting in this area of her neck and then coming out and over the side of her shoulder and then along the side of her chest and then down and then hitting the chair and sitting where the chair is and bunching here at the corner where it hits her hip and might be moving forward just a little bit by her waist, that kind of thing. So this is a good example of a fairly static yet still dynamic sectioning of hair in a way that there's still movement here. Like, this hair isn't just flat and boring, there's still movement in the hair. And now, I won't lie to you and say that a lot of that is created by the lines inside the hair, the sectioning, the coloring, all that stuff. That absolutely has something. Then we have another example of, again, something that's slicked back. Her hair is wet, but you can see that here it is, her head's turning. So the hair is scrunching up in that area because she's turning her head, and it's getting stuck on that part of her neck because it was sitting there, you know, straight when she was looking forward or looking in the other direction or whatever the case is. But you'll see that the hair is bunching up in different ways, very specifically based on her head movement. So it's not just this slick, wet hair, like there's dimension to it, even though the hair is wet and maybe doesn't have as much volume as it would when it's dry, that kind of thing. The last one is slightly not safe for work, so just be prepared for that, and that's this one here. But this has a very, very good example of how the hair bunches when the head is tilted, and how it might bunch up, like here, where it's kind of almost falling down from that area, but it's getting stuck on her shirt that she has pulled up in her mouth, and bunching up here by her neck, and then getting caught here on the side of her shirt, and behind her shoulder, moving and getting caught in the crook of her arm, and that kind of thing, and then falling behind her. So there are so many things you can do with straight hair just by paying attention to where the hair is sitting and what is underneath it. Because again, because there is no texture in the hair, the obstacles for how the hair moves are not coming from inside the house, as it were. It's not coming from in the hair. It is like it would with a wavy hair or with curly hair. It's coming from whatever the hair is coming into contact with. So your face, your neck, your clothes, your anything. Whatever it is that it's coming into contact with is going to affect how the hair moves, how it sits, how it doesn't move, you know, that kind of thing. So it's very good to keep in mind, but if you do that, you are going to get a much more dynamic looking movement out of the hair, even though it's straight. So just keep that in the back of your head when you're sketching these out and practicing over this week. But I think what we're going to do is, again, keep it a little bit shorter, just because I feel like the next 4 sections are sections that really need to be together, and I don't want to have to stop in the middle of sectioning and lines, or in the middle of color, or middle of shading, or anything like that. I want to be able to do all of those in one stream, and I have a feeling that's going to take a couple hours. So I think we'll leave it here for now. But before we go, are there any other questions that anybody had on everything that we did today, which I will review while you are thinking of questions? So we had short hair, straight, wavy, and curly, and kind of how that sits, how the length of the hair will affect the curl pattern, and how if you have the same length of hair in each one of these pictures, how much shorter it will look depending on the amount of texture in the hair. Then we have medium hair, medium length hair. So medium length being anywhere from around the chin to about the top of the collarbone. I would consider medium length hair, straight, wavy, curly. How the hair moves, and with straight hair very specifically, ways to kind of create a little bit of dimension is, you know, how the hair moves from the back of the head and what you see, you know, kind of peeking out, how that looks natural rather than messy, and kind of how to achieve that. And then lastly, we've got long hair, which again, we really only did a couple things because in the first session we used long hair as the example for the textures. But talking about straight hair, this was really the biggest thing because again, long hair is where straight hair really shines, in my opinion. And you have the opportunity to do a lot more with it, whereas with wavy and curly, those really shine when you're dealing with medium to short length styles. Question is, did I use references until I fully understood? Yes and no. So here's the thing. No matter what you do, unless you are doing like an actual like photo study of a picture, and you are drawing a realistic, intentionally photorealistic picture. When you're doing illustrations and things like that, a lot of the times there is a necessity for movements to be exaggerated. It's almost as if when you're acting, there are certain things that have to be exaggerated because you're not face to face with a person. You're trying to convey an emotion through a screen. So it feels like you might be overacting, but in reality it's really conveying a very deep feeling to the person watching you through a screen rather than being right in front of you and being able to kind of feel the energy coming off of you from a genuine emotion. It is I don't know what that is, the stretch and snap. I don't know what that is. But there is an amount of exaggeration that you need to put into it to create an illusion of movement in a picture with the hair. Now, there are a host of other ways to create movement in the picture. You can do it with pose, you can do it with the clothing, you can do it with the environment around them. There are a number of ways to do that, but specifically when dealing with hair, you really need to an extent, you need to over-exaggerate a lot of those movements in order to make it feel as if there is more movement than there might actually be. So keep that in mind when you're using actual reference photos, is that you may look at the reference photo and think, yes, I really like the way that looks. And then when you draw it, you're like, oh, but it's like kind of flat and there's no dimension there. And adding a little bit more intensity to one of the curves, or maybe adding an extra piece of hair that is maybe kind of moving in the same direction, but has been separated from the rest of the hair. A good example of that is something like this. So chances are this hairstyle, it's just going to swoop over and whatever if you were looking at this in a photo. But adding little bits like this piece in the front that kind of move in the other direction and then move back, or these bits that kind of fall in front of his face on either side, you know, things like that. You may not see those in a photo because those are considered imperfections because they want the hair to look really coiffed and perfect. And in a photo, because it's a picture of a 3D person, of a real person, that is easier to convey and to see that that's the intention. But when you start to put it onto a piece of paper, when you're doing a flatter style illustration like this rather than a photorealistic drawing, it's important to remember that you may have to add those things in to make it look a little bit less flat, to give it a little bit more dimension and depth. So yes and no is the answer to your question. I know that was really a long way to go for an answer, but that's the reasoning behind why I don't think that unless you are doing photorealistic portraiture, which I don't know why you would be in this stream if that's what you were doing, because that is not what I do. But it is, I think, really important to remember that using that as a base is a great idea. But I would almost use it as a way to see and feel how you want the movement to look, and then put a base down, and then start adding little bits onto it that maybe aren't in the photo until you get the same feeling looking at your piece as you do looking at the photo. Does that make sense? You want to kind of match those energies, if you will, and you want to match the feeling of movement that you get between the two things because they're different. So hopefully that was a helpful answer. Oh, it was really helpful. Thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. Again, I know we only have a few people in here today, but are there any other questions before I kind of go for the day and let y'all stew on what's been going on? Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody coming in today. Apologies for yesterday. I know the stream ended very, very abruptly yesterday, but we had an issue with the file server. One of our drives, the connector, committed suicide. It melted itself pretty intensely. So, but everything's good. We're fine. The file server is fine. I mean, that drive is probably lost. But the good news is that there's a RAID set up, so there's redundancy there. The drive was cloned. It just sucks because it was one of the larger drives. So, but apologies again. Thank you for coming back today to watch it today, and for anybody that either is in here and missed the first part of this or missed any of this, I will have this up on YouTube sometime today. So you'll be able to go and look at it. If you go to my Twitter, you'll be able to see when that goes live. I'll post it on there. And feel free, if you have questions when you're going through it, you can definitely send me a message. You can, contact me, put a comment on those posts, whatever you need to do. If you have questions, show me examples too. Please feel free to send me shit. Be like, hey, I see this, but I'm not quite understanding. Can you send me an example? Or, hey, can you help me critique this and see what it is that I might be able to add to give it this feel or whatever. Feel free. That's what I am here for. That's why I'm doing these streams, is because I get a lot of these questions anyway, and I feel like this is a good opportunity for me to share my knowledge. And until I started doing this last week, I didn't really realize how much I knew about it and how many things go through my head when I'm drawing something and when I'm doing hair on a subject, because I've been doing it for so long that it's just something that comes naturally to me. So I don't really think about the actual steps that I take, which is why this has been split up into what will likely be 4 or 5 different sessions, because there is apparently a lot that goes into it. I was not aware. So I am happy to help and to provide any kind of answers or, critiques or whatever it is that you're looking for. I am happy to help with that. So, but yeah, thanks again, guys, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye!